What if I told you that on her wedding night, a Victorian bride often stepped into the most terrifying moment of her life, completely unprepared? Imagine this. Nearly every young woman of the 19th century entered marriage without the slightest idea of what was about to happen. No lessons, no guidance, just fear, silence, and a locked bedroom door. Some brides later confessed in secret diaries that they thought their husbands were trying to harm them, while others wrote that they prayed for morning to arrive before the night was over. But why was an event we now imagine as romantic and intimate instead remembered as one of the most shocking, painful, and confusing experiences of their lives? Tonight, we are going to peel back the lace curtains of the Victorian era and uncover what really happened on those so-called wedding nights. And trust me, every detail will both shock you and make you grateful for the present. Stay with me until the very end, because the secrets hidden in those bridal chambers will change the way you see history forever. And before we dive in, if you enjoy uncovering dark secrets of the past and want more stories like this, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it so I have the motivation to bring you even more. Now, let's step into the room where the Victorian bride met her greatest mystery. Let's start with the most unsettling truth. 90% of Victorian brides had no idea what was waiting for them on their wedding night. Think about that for a second. A young woman, raised to be pure and obedient, standing in a candlelit bedroom with a man she might barely know, trembling in a heavy wedding gown that takes forever to remove. No mother had ever explained. No book had ever prepared her. And polite society considered such talk improper. So she entered that moment with innocence so complete. It was almost cruel. I've read diary entries where brides confessed they thought their husbands were trying to hurt them. One even described lying still, eyes shut tight, praying for the sound of the church bells the next morning. Others wrote that they were too frightened to cry out, fearing shame more than pain. And the truth is, for many of them, this wasn't a night of romance but a night of shock, confusion, and sometimes even trauma. When I imagine those moments, I can't help but feel a wave of empathy. We often think of the Victorian era as lace, roses, and candlelit courtship, but in reality, it was also silence, fear, and an almost deliberate ignorance forced upon women. It makes me wonder, how many lives were shaped by that one single night? How many marriages began with misunderstanding rather than love? This is where the story begins to reveal its darker layers. Because if the brides themselves were unprepared, then where did they look for answers? Who guided them, if anyone at all? That brings us to the strange manuals and bizarre advice that replaced real education. Clues hidden not in the voices of mothers, but in the sermons of priests and the writings of doctors. And trust me, those instructions were as shocking as they were misleading. Let's open that chapter next. If a Victorian bride had questions before her wedding night, she certainly wasn't going to ask her mother. Conversations like that were considered shameful, even dangerous. Instead, the guides she received came from two unlikely sources, the church and the doctor. And trust me, neither offered comfort. The church often reminded women that their duty was obedience, not desire. Imagine hearing on the Sunday before your wedding that a good wife should submit to her husband quietly, without complaint, because intimacy was meant only for producing children. No talk of affection, no talk of pleasure, just obligation dressed up as holiness. Some brides carried these words into marriage like chains around their hearts. And then there were the doctors. In the mid-19th century, medical books circulated with the strangest advice. One physician warned that women should never show enjoyment, claiming it could damage their character. Another wrote that the best wives were those who endured the marital act with dignity, as one endures a duty. When I first read those lines, I couldn't decide whether to laugh or feel outraged. It almost sounds like satire. But these were serious instructions passed down as science. To me, this reveals something heartbreaking. Instead of being taught that marriage could be tender, women were handed scripts that turned them into silent participants. And if a young bride had any private hopes of love, these so-called manuals worked hard to crush them. I can only imagine the confusion, walking into marriage armed with passages from the Bible and the cold words of physicians, but no human warmth. And yet, the strangest part is still ahead. Because when the moment finally came, it wasn't just the advice that shaped the experience, it was the physical setting itself. The bedroom, the clothes, the sounds, even the smell. That is where the true reality of the Victorian wedding night comes alive. Let's step inside that room together. Now picture the bedroom itself, the stage where every secret of the Victorian wedding night unfolded. Forget the romantic images we see in films. The truth was far less glamorous. The room was dim, lit only by flickering candles that cast long, uneasy shadows on the walls. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of unwashed fabric and human sweat. Remember, people often bathed once a week, sometimes even less, so the intimacy of that night came with scents we can hardly imagine today. The bed, usually small and creaky, was covered with heavy quilts. For the bride, just getting ready could feel like a trial. Layers of corsets, stockings, and endless buttons meant undressing could take 30 minutes or more. By the time she stood there, trembling in her shift, the atmosphere was less about romance and more about exhaustion. And all of this happened in silence. Talking openly about what was going on was almost unthinkable. Many brides described the quiet as suffocating. The only sounds were the rustle of fabric, the groan of the mattress, or the ticking of a clock in the corner. I can't help but imagine how overwhelming that must have felt. Imagine being 19, standing in that half-dark room, not knowing what your husband expects, not knowing what your body is supposed to do, and being too ashamed to ask. To me, the silence is the most haunting part. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the absence of comfort, of guidance, of humanity. And yet, this silence didn't end when the candles went out. It lingered, echoing in the lives of these women for years. Because what happened that first night often shaped how they saw marriage itself. Some carried fear, others resignation, and a few tried to bury the memory altogether. But what if that silence turned into something even darker? What if innocence and ignorance didn't just create confusion, but real suffering? That is where the next part of our story takes us, into the hidden aftermath behind closed doors. Behind those closed doors, innocence quickly turned into something far more painful. Many brides became pregnant within weeks of their wedding, yet had no idea how or why. Imagine the fear of a 19-year-old, her body changing, whispers around her telling her it was God's will, while she herself still did not understand the most basic mechanics of reproduction. Some wrote in letters that they thought they had been cursed. Others described feeling betrayed by the very people who had kept them in ignorance. And the emotional toll was even heavier. Diaries reveal women who dreaded the sound of their husband's footsteps at night. One bride admitted she wept silently every evening, clutching her pillow so her sobs would not be heard. Another confessed she prayed her husband would simply fall asleep and leave her alone. For them, the wedding night was not a single memory, it was the beginning of years of quiet suffering. When I read these accounts, I can't help but feel both anger and sadness. Anger at a society that taught women to remain silent, and sadness for those who had no one to guide them through what should have been a shared journey of trust. It reminds me that history is not just dates and events, it is lived experience, often filled with pain that official records prefer to ignore. And yet, these hidden voices matter, because they show us how easily innocence, when combined with silence, can become tragedy. They remind us that without knowledge and compassion, love itself can be twisted into fear. Which brings us to the most important question of all. What lesson does this painful past leave for us today? In the final part, we'll see how these forgotten stories become a warning, a reminder of why education, empathy, and open conversation are not just luxuries, but lifelines. Looking back, the most haunting part of these Victorian wedding nights isn't just the fear, the silence, or the tears, it's the fact that they were never spoken of. Entire generations of women carried those secrets quietly, locked away in journals or whispered only to a trusted friend. And to me, that silence is the real tragedy. Because when knowledge is hidden, pain multiplies. The lesson for us today is clear. Education, empathy, and open conversation are not optional, they are the foundations of trust and love. A marriage should never begin with ignorance and fear. It should begin with honesty. With two people meeting each other not in the dark, but in the light of understanding. I often wonder how different those women's lives might have been if someone had simply told them the truth, or reassured them that what they were feeling was normal. How much suffering could have been prevented by a single honest conversation? And maybe that's the gift these stories leave us. They remind us never to take for granted the freedoms we have now, the ability to ask questions, To talk openly about love, about our bodies, about intimacy without shame. What was once taboo is now a conversation that can protect, heal, and connect us. So when we remember the brides of the 19th century, let's not just pity them. Let's listen to them. Let's honor their voices by refusing to let history repeat itself. And if you've ever heard a story from your own family, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, about marriage, silence, or secrets, share it in the comments below. These stories matter. They are warnings, but they are also bridges, carrying lessons from the past into the future. And if you'd like me to uncover more hidden truths from history, secrets that reveal how people truly lived, loved, and endured, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it. Together, we can make sure no voice, no matter how faint, is ever lost again.